What's going on, everybody? It's June 30th, which means summer has started, and man, am I feeling it up here. That's why I don't have a shirt on. That's why maybe you can hear my fan on over here. By my standards, it's about as fucking hot as it gets up here today. It's mid-90s in the middle of the day these days. Doesn't ever really cool down. Even during the night, it remains pretty damn hot. Doing what I can to cope with it, but for a person like me who's grown up and spent basically my whole life in Washington State, this is unbearable. So thought I'd go ahead and shoot a video because I haven't shot a video in a while, and I'm going to be talking about the Boston Celtics and Brooklyn Nets mega trade that went down a couple days ago. I don't usually make videos about every little thing that happens in basketball, but this trade is so big, I wanted to make a video about it on top of the article I wrote about it, which I will be linking down below on my website. So, basically, in terms of all the different pieces that got traded, this is one of the biggest trades I can ever remember in the NBA, even if this trade doesn't involve a superstar, and that's a fair point. It's not like the Carmelo Anthony trade, which involved a super-duper star, but a lot of players involved. So let's break it down real quick. I'm going to first break it down from the side of the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets acquired Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry. All three of those players have played in a lot of playoff games. All three of those players have played in championships. They have won championships. They have had very key contributions to championship-winning teams, and two of them are definitely going to the Hall of Fame. In exchange, they gave up 2 role players who were very flawed, 3 players who are kind of on the roster, but they barely play, 3 hopefully late first-round picks, and the rights to swap first-round picks in 2017. So they gave up a lot of small pieces. They basically gave up a bunch of quarters to get some dollars. And in my opinion, this trade... Well, I'll break down who I thought won in a little bit, but let's just break down the trade from the Brooklyn perspective. The good news for the Nets is that they have made their team better in the short term, by which I mean this upcoming 13-14 season. Last year, their power forwards were Chris Humphries and Reggie Evans. Both those guys can play. Chris Humphries is a great rebounder. Reggie Evans can rebound, and he does some good work on defense as well. He's a tough guy who can get in there and fight down low, but he's a very limited player. He doesn't score very much. Chris Humphries is not a great scorer either, especially last year. So they had 2 guys playing power forward last year, and both were good, but both had big problems in their game. Humphries was not a good defender. Basically, all he was a half-decent finisher and a rebounder. Now they're going to be starting Kevin Garnett and playing him about 25 minutes a night. He's a great defender still. He's a good scorer. He has a jump shot. Not as much as he used to, but he still has it. He can rebound a little bit. Not as much as he used to again, but still decent. Great screener up top. He's great setting screens for point guards. So that is a big upgrade, and it really reduces some of the limitations of their old roster. They also traded Gerald Wallace, who last year was their primary small forward. And Gerald Wallace is not a terrible player, but he was very much overpaid. His game was not what it used to be. He wasn't as good of a rebounder as he used to be. He wasn't as good of a defender or finisher or shooter. He was decent in many of those areas, but he wasn't great anymore. Occasionally, he would hit a couple threes in a row, and you think maybe he found his shot, but then it would disappear a little later. Paul Pierce, more complete player, better all-around player. He can shoot better. He's still a pretty good rebounder. He can still score. He can create his own shot. He can create shots for other people. Just a good all-around small forward that is an immediate upgrade over Gerald Wallace. So they have given themselves those 2 immediate starting upgrades. And they also acquired Jason Terry as a 6th man off the bench to come off the bench to score. Last year, the 6th man on the Nets was probably Chris Humphries, maybe Andre Bloch. Not a great bench situation. Andre Bloch had a decent season. Chris Humphries was okay, but it wasn't a great bench situation. Jason Terry will immediately come off the bench as a 6th man and become a much more credible scorer than anybody they had coming off the bench last year. And I'm going to grab me some water because it's hot up here. So that's all good. And they got three very good players without having to give up their three best players, any of their three best players. They kept their core of three best players. So that's good, and the goal of this Nets team is to get as good as they can in the short term, screw money, so spend whatever it takes to get good players in, and they have certainly done that here. Here's the problem, though. When I say spending a lot of money on fielding the best team possible, I really mean it. I mean, this Nets team, let me break down some numbers. Next year, their starting five will make $82.3 million. That is $12 million above the luxury tax threshold just for your starting five. And remember, that starting five has a 36-year-old playing small forward and a 37-year-old playing the power forward. These are old guys who may wear down at the end of the season. These are old guys who can't play 30 minutes every night. You're going to have to rest them at certain times. You're going to only be able to play them 25 to 28 minutes a night. There are limitations with this lineup. They're all very good players. Deron Williams is a superstar, bordering on super-duper star when he feels like it. Brook Lopez is a very good scoring, rangy center. Joe Johnson is a solid, small shooting guard, even though he is overpaid. They are good players, but this is a problematic starting lineup in some ways. Now, the top 8, so if you include the guys who are going to come off the bench primarily for this Nets team, you have right now Jason Terry, C.J. Watson, and Reggie Evans. And I think they're going to bring in maybe Corey Brewer or some other 3 to back up Paul Pierce, who's decent. I really like the Corey Brewer fit if they can afford it. Yeah, so those 3 guys, if you add those in, $90.4 million next year. That is $20 million above the luxury tax threshold. $20 million. And they still need to get 4 more players. They're going to have to go get a backup small forward. They're going to have to go get some depth. And when it's all done, they are probably going to owe $100 million to their players just for next year. That is $30 million above the luxury tax threshold. And that's a lot of money that they're going to owe the league at the end of the year. There's also huge luxury tax penalties that could happen down the road. I know Prokhorov doesn't care, but the thing is this lineup that he's going to spend a shit ton of money on worth that money? And the answer to that is, I don't think so. I don't think they're as good as Miami. I don't think they're definitely better than Indiana. I don't think they're definitely better than even the Knicks, maybe. It kind of depends on what the Knicks do. But you're talking about a team that does not have a bona fide super-duper star. Deron Williams, he's close. Some nights he gets there. Some nights he is that franchise #1 superstar championship player. Other nights he's not. Sometimes he looks like he would be better off playing with a true super-duper star. Somebody who really needs to play off a guy like, say, I don't know, I wouldn't say LeBron James, but maybe you give him a Dwight Howard and let them go off each other. And some nights that's who he is. Brook Lopez is certainly not a #1 franchise option. Joe Johnson is certainly not that anymore. He arguably never was. And then you have some older players, players that are limited. Brook Lopez is never going to be a great rebounder or defender, I don't think. Deron Williams, not a great defender. Joe Johnson, he's he's not quite what he used to be. It is a very good roster, one of the best rosters in the league, but it has flaws and it's not as good as other teams in their own conference. So the point I'm trying to make is this is a lot of money to spend for a team that doesn't have a great shot at the title. So going into the next year, they're going to have $70.7 million committed to their 4 best players. They are already over the luxury tax line, or right at the luxury tax line, just for Deron Williams, Joe Johnson, Kevin Garnett, and Brook Lopez. I don't feel great about that. They're going to have to sign a bunch more players. They're going to have to continue to pay Jason Terry as well. That's just too much money for a team that isn't guaranteed anything. And then the year after that, so 3 years down the road, they're going to owe $63 million total to Deron Williams, Joe Johnson, and Brook Lopez. And all those guys are going to be, well, mainly Joe Johnson is going to have some age concerns. He's going to be 34 years old. So, yeah, the question is, Brooklyn has made themselves better with this trade. How do they make themselves even better so they can actually beat Miami? The answer to that is, I don't think they can. In situations like this, you look at draft picks. They just gave away all their draft picks to Boston in this trade. You look at expiring contracts. They have two. C.J. Watson, who is only $1.1 million, and Paul Pierce, who they just got, and it would make no sense for them to trade him now. So I don't know what they do if they want to get better. In order to get a good player, they'd have to give up one of their good players and probably make a lateral movement. So I think Brooklyn made themselves better, but not better by enough. So for my taste, Brooklyn needs to find a way to do better than they have, and I don't know if that way is out there. Now let's look at the Celtics, what they got. They got Chris Humphries, a decent role player who's a good rebounder, and really that's about it, but he can rebound. You have Gerald Wallace, who can do quite a few things at the three, okay, but he's no longer great at anything. Maybe defense from time to time. Excuse me. Yeah, but yeah, a role player. Then you have three kind of bogus players who don't really play much. Marshawn Brooks, who has 1 year left at $1.2 million. Keith Bogans, who becomes a free agent in 2 weeks and won't be back, I'm sure. And Chris Joseph, who makes like $800,000 next year, and then he's a free agent. So those players don't matter. They got 3 first-round picks and the rights to swap first-round picks in 2017. So let's cover the good with this trade first. The Celtics got rid of 2 players who have 2 years left on their contract. And, of course, Paul Pierce, who was expiring. So basically, they got out of having to pay Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry a combined approximately close to $30 million next year. So that's big. And they also got out of having to pay Kevin Garnett and Jason Terry about $18 million in 2 years. And in exchange, they got expiring contracts. Chris Humphries, Marshawn Brooks, Chris Joseph all expire at the end of the next season. Keith Bogans already expires in 2 weeks. So they're going to free up a lot of cap space over the next year and free themselves up to make some free agency plays in the next 2 to 3 years. That was their goal. That's what they got. They also got 3 first-round picks, and chances are those picks are not going to fall in the lottery. But even if they don't, you can find gems in the later rounds. It wasn't that long ago that the Celtics, I think they got Avery Bradley out of the lottery. Outside of the lottery, there's Tony Parker was picked outside of the lottery. You can find gems. You just hope that with 3 bonus opportunities to get one, 4 if you count what happened with the Doc Rivers deal, the Celtics can find at least 1 late first-round gem. So the problems I see with this trade is that while the Celtics acquired some cap flexibility, I don't think they acquired enough. The main problem with this trade is they had to take back Gerald Wallace, who has 3 years left on his contract, and he makes $10 million a year over those 3 years. $10.1 million, in fact. So that is a big, obnoxious contract to keep on their payroll, and by itself, that might not be a problem. But if you look at the Celtics roster after this trade, you have Rajon Rondo, who makes a fair salary. He makes $25 million over the next 2 years. I'm not a big Rajon Rondo fan, but that is a fair price for what he does. I think there are some flaws in his game, and I think he's paid appropriately. They're paying Avery Bradley $2.5 million next year, and then he's a free agent. I'm sure they'll keep him, but he is definitely underpaid. They're paying Fat Mello and Jared Sullinger a little bit of money. They're rookies. They're not going to make that much money. All that's great. And, of course, they have the Chris Humphries expiring. That's all well and good. Here's the problem. Even after they dumped Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and Jason Terry, which is a big victory, they're still sitting on the following players who have over-large contracts that extend for quite a while. Jeff Green will make about $28 million over the next 3 years. And some nights he looks like he's worth it, other nights he doesn't. So we'll see what happens with his career. Brandon Bass is going to make over $13 million over the next 2 years. He's a decent player. I don't think he's worth that much. I view him as a player who might be worth $5 million a year, not $7 million a year. Courtney Lee, they signed him last offseason. I think they already regret it. They're paying him an average of $5.5 million a year over the next 3 years. I view him as a player who's probably worth $3 or $4 million, not $5.5. Those are contracts that are going to be a problem. Nobody wants those contracts with the exception of maybe Jeff Green, and I'm dubious of that. So if you add it all up, the 9-man rotation for the Boston Celtics this year, those 9 players I just mentioned, will be making a grand total of $59 million. That gets them fairly close to the luxury tax line, and after they fill out their roster with 3 or 4 more players, they're going to be at the luxury tax line more or less. So not as much freedom as you would think. Next season, the season after the next one, they'll be committed to almost $48 million for a top 7 that isn't even any good. They're going to have to fill out the rest of the roster, and they're going to be pretty close to the salary cap line, and they're probably not going to really have room for even one max contract. And then 3 years down the line, they are still paying Jeff Green, Gerald Wallace, and Courtney Lee a total of $25 million. Those are 3 players who might not be anything really all that worth it, and they're still paying them all that money, and that's going to be a problem if they want to go after a big-time free agent. But the good news, and the reason why I think Boston won this trade, is the Celtics moved closer to cap freedom, and they can get to that cap freedom with one more trade. And the point is, right now the Celtics are trying to bottom out and get as bad as they possibly can, and the way they can do that is to use their last remaining blue chip asset, which is Rajon Rondo. There are rumors that the Celtics want to trade Rajon Rondo to the Dallas Mavericks, and I've heard 2 offers on the table right now. The first is Rajon Rondo and 2 of the bad Celtics contracts, like maybe Brandon Bass and Gerald Wallace, in exchange for Sean Marion, Vince Carter, some picks, maybe some money, and maybe the rookie that the Mavericks just drafted. So the purpose of that goal would be to acquire 2 expiring contracts in Marion and Carter, and then you get some draft picks who are going to turn into cheap players. You get a cheap rookie, you get some money, and basically you got rid of 2 of your 3 or 4 bad contracts, depending on how you feel about Jeff Green. Now your only remaining problem is Courtney Lee, who you can live with. The second trade offer I've heard is Rajon Rondo and 2 of the bad contracts, like maybe Gerald Wallace and Courtney Lee, for Dirk Nowitzki, and maybe you also throw in either Marion, Carter, draft picks money, something like that. And the purpose of that trade would be Dirk Nowitzki is an expiring contract. He makes $23 million this year, and then he's a free agent. So that's another expiring contract that the Celtics acquire, and they're shedding that long-term salary. Now, it's tough to trade Rajon Rondo, and I understand that, but the goal of the Celtics right now is to be as bad as possible for the next year or 2, to get maybe a chance at Andrew Wiggins, to get salary cap freedom, and I think both those trades would be beneficial to the Celtics. I don't think Dallas will trade Dirk, but I absolutely think they'll trade Sean Marion or Vince Carter in order to acquire a piece like Rajon Rondo to lure Dwight Howard in. Because that's their goal right now. They want to get their hands on Dwight Howard, and they have a decent chance at it, and they need the right pieces to get him to come in, and maybe that piece is Rajon Rondo. So, if the Celtics can pull this off, their only questionable contracts going forward will be the Jeff Green contract, and then probably the Courtney Lee or Brandon Bass contracts. You can live with a couple of questionable contracts that aren't all that terrible. Neither of those contracts are that terrible, but you can live with having a couple of them. You can't live with having 3 or 4 of them. So, in my opinion, if the Celtics can parlay the Rajon Rondo trade chip into getting rid of 2 or 3 other bad contracts, then they will have the ultimate cap freedom going forward into next year and the year after. And bottom out for Andrew Wiggins. So, basically, if you look at all this, I think the Celtics won this trade because they have given themselves the opportunity to continue toward their goal. Both teams moved closer to their goal, but the Celtics have the much better opportunity of actually getting there. Next year, maybe you get LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh. They might be free agents. Maybe even a guy like, I don't know what Paul George's contract status is right now. Kawhi Leonard could become a free agent in a couple of years. You give yourself the opportunity to get those guys. And that's why I think the Celtics won this trade, but they need to do a little bit more to get better. So that's my thoughts on this trade. This video is way too long. I think both teams did what they needed to do, but both teams have more to do. But the Celtics won, and that's it.